You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com. There's an interesting bill that is coming before the legislature, or is this something that somebody wants to introduce? Tell me about this one, Ed.
It's a piece of legislation being brought by a state representative named Bob Morgan, that if you are a major sports entity in this state and you would like a brand new stadium, partially funded by the public, that you must have had 3 out of your last 5 seasons as winning seasons. Which disqualifies literally every team except the Cubs in this town right now.
Pass it right now. I know
pass it right away.
I know it's done for grandstanding by a politician, but pass it right now. Pass it immediately. Like if you can't finish outside the bottom 3 for like 2-3 years, you should be relegated. Tell these billionaires there's money attached to performance, and watch them suddenly find a way to spend money and put together better teams. Watch accountability in front offices from ownership if suddenly you're costing billionaires money. That's the whole thing. The only way you fix the broken system, which is pro sports, in which there are entire fan bases, entire cities, entire regions that just have to suffer year in, year out with bad ownership. The only way you fix it is attach it to their money. I love that. I think that's a great idea.
Oh, it's a wonderful idea, and it's something where it's like, yeah, okay, you know, if you're a good team and you are important to the state of Illinois, right? You're bringing in money, you are generating revenue, you are, you know, a place where fans will come and travel, okay? Then, sure. We'll help you out, especially if it's going to be a stadium that's going to do other things for the state of Illinois.
I want more than just a winning record. I want playoff berths. So like it should be like 3 out of 5 years with a winning season, which means you're over 500, and a playoff berth.
I think it should be 3 out of 5 you were in the playoffs, frankly.
You know what? I'm good with that too. You want me to spend billions of dollars in taxpayer money? Give me a reason why you should be in this town. I love the idea. Do it, keep it, print it. I want 1,000 of them. Keep it 100. Okay? That's what I want. Let's talk about the White Sox because pitchers and catchers report the day this episode comes out. And let's talk about a conversation that I had with my father this morning where he told me, I'm really enjoying the show, but I don't know who half the people are you're talking about.
Well, you know, I actually had the thought, as you said, pitchers and catchers were reporting. How many players are we going to hear about that got to the park and the facility and weren't allowed in because nobody knew that they were an actual player on this team?
Well, here's the thing. I get what he's saying. You have fans that stopped watching halfway through the year last year. You have people who listen to this podcast who needed a couple of months off. You have acquisitions that have occurred, changes in the depth chart. You've had word about certain guys that might get a chance to make this team this year or might be part of the core in future years that may have slipped by people because of how bad the team is. It's impossible to expect all White Sox fans to have kept complete track of everything going on with the team over the last calendar year, especially over the last 6 months. So today we're going to meet the White Sox. In case you have been away from the White Sox, in case you have needed a break from the White Sox, let me reintroduce you to the Chicago White Sox and who this team is. With just the quick little note that over the offseason, the general manager continued to surround himself with people from outside the organization who were good at their job, changed the structure in the front office, changed who reported to who, completely overhauled the international system, all the guys that are going out and scouting, all that stuff like that, completely overhauled that, and continues to work on player development. You might not be happy with all those things because it doesn't mean that they spent $100 million this year on a contract, but that's something that's been going on. And now you have a team that is in the midst of, I hate using the word rebuild, but that's what they're going to tell you. And we need to kind of learn who this team is as pitchers and catchers report, and 5 days later is their first full squad practice. So let's just take a look, first of all, at FanGraphs' projected lineup, which I don't think will be the ending lineup as they break camp. But if we look at the 9 going around the horn, or let's say the 8 that are out there in the field and the designated hitter favorites, at least according to Fangraphs going into spring training, we'll start at first base, and Andrew Vaughn is back. And here's what I want to do, Ed. When I talk about a player, let's just give what our true impression is of that player, right? Let's speak in layman's terms. Let's not get too in depth. Let's just give what our opinion is of that player.
I was going to say, I don't know any of these players well enough to do an impression of them.
Okay, so Andrew Vaughn, a replacement level first baseman with average to slightly below average defense, will be returning to first base, where the hope is that the new hitting guru is going to unlock something. And I believe he's only been brought back this year in arbitration because they don't want to let him go before they get 1 year of Ryan Fuller and company, seeing if they can finally unlock any kind of potential out of Andrew Vaughn. Otherwise, he's a very replaceable first baseman who may or may not finish the year in the starting lineup, depending on how guys behind him perform and how he performs in the first half of the season.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I also don't discount the idea that he's back because there's a chance that he might be the only person besides Luis Robert Jr. who has fans in the stadium wearing his jersey.
That's also one of the reasons he's back. All right, second base. Second base right now, Fangraphs is projecting Lenin Sosa to be the second baseman. I do not think that's how it's going to go.
Me neither.
I don't think that's what it's going to be. He may not even make the opening day roster. I like him for a guy that should get some at-bats based upon what he did in the last couple months of the season. I don't think he's very good defensively. I'd like to see his bat play a little bit, though. I wouldn't have minded him being the starting first baseman. I wouldn't mind seeing him get some reps there. He'll be an interesting name. We'll move on to shortstop, and right now the projected shortstop is Colson Montgomery, even though he had a terrible minor league campaign last year with the exception of the last few weeks. And he performed in the Arizona Fall League, but he's projected to make the starting 9 of this team by Fangraphs based upon Chris Getz kind of pushing it, and you kind of notice the organization is almost wishing him to have a great spring so he can start at short or at least get there very soon after. And third base, Josh Rojas is a replacement level player who has the ability to have an above replacement level season, who's probably going to be the third baseman, plays third, plays second. He was acquired as a free agent. He's a real baseball player. He's a professional. He's somebody that I think you're going to see in the lineup every day unless he needs a rest. So learn his name. And that gives you the at least projected infield right now for the White Sox. Your thoughts?
Lenin Sosa will not be the starting second baseman. Josh Rojas will, because there's more players available for third than there are for second. Because the only other real challenger for second is Chase Mydroth, who came over in the Garrett Crochet trade. Sosa, though, is a guy that I would like to see in the DH role, perhaps, because of the way his bat plays. And if he can hit his way onto this team, I would rather him take that role and run with it and just be a bat and a guy who, in a pinch, you can come in and play on the infield, or a guy that eventually, like you said, supplants Andrew Vaughn. As far as what else can be up there, I mean, they just signed Brandon Drury, who's another cast-off veteran, old dude.
Mydroth and Drury are both guys that are projected by Fangraphs to make the team off the bench. They're both non-roster invitees, so they would be guys that would have to be added to the 40-man. Somebody would be dropped. That's hard on teams to do, even though Chris Getz has cut loose an awful lot of players off the 40-man in this offseason. So he has been pretty cutthroat, which is what I like out of my general manager. But those two guys are projected to be in the mix. And Miguel Vargas, to go back to your point on how Rojas is probably going to be the second baseman instead of the third baseman, he's projected to be their designated hitter. Everything the team is saying, Scott Merkin was on this show recently, he's going to get another opportunity like he has not had enough of them. Got a full half season with the Dodgers, couldn't do it. Got plenty of time with the White Sox last year, but they traded to get this guy, so they're going to give him a shot out of the gate. He's projected as the DH, but he may just be the third baseman with Rojas over there at second base, but that's another guy you add into the mix. Those are the guys that infielder-wise are being considered, and Drury, for his career, is replacement level. But over the last several years, with the exception of last season, has been an above average hitter when you look at his OPS plus. So what they're looking for here is a guy that shows up at camp and still has a little bit of gas in the tank. Switch to a new age of life with Hyatt Home Medical Equipment. Keep mom and dad, grandma and grandpa out of assisted living and make it so they can get around on their own and live independently. Hyatt Home Medical Equipment has stair lifts, ramps, grab bars, lift chairs, and even bathroom remodeling. They're going to work with your insurance and have 0% financing for qualified individuals. If you have a CPAP machine and you're unhappy with your vendor, switch now. Get supplies directly mailed to you. They also have the latest and greatest in continuous glucose monitors and so much more. See what Hyatt Home Medical Equipment can do for you at hhme.com.
Yeah, there's not much to know. I mean, he's a name that might be familiar to White Sox fans who aren't paying attention to the team, just because he's been around and he's been on other teams and you've faced him, as the White Sox. But he's not a guy that you necessarily need to sit there and say, okay, am I really interested in what this guy is going to do? Because he's really just a guy at this point in his career. And he's somebody that might get some play, but he's not going to be a guy that you're going to sit there and have on this team for years and years to come. He's somebody that if he has a nice first half, he goes away to the highest bidder for whatever you can get. And the guy that's left out is a guy that White Sox fans probably got to know a little bit last year, and that's Brian Ramos.
Right. Well, Ramos is a third baseman that probably won't get an opportunity because they want to force Vargas into a role. And then you look at other infielders that are on the 40-man. Jacob Amaya was brought back after they had let him go, and he's on the 40-man, and he can play shortstop, and he's one of the few, him and Brooks Baldwin. So they're the guys that are sitting there in case Colson Montgomery can't take that job. You got a couple extra non-roster invitees in the middle infield that I don't think bear mentioning until they show me something. So you're going to see some other names are going to pop up. But let's see here. Tristan Gray is going to show up there. He's a third base, shortstop, first base is how he's listed. Nick Maton, Jacob Gonzalez. These are guys that are going to get an opportunity to come in and try out in the infield. They have very, very, very outside shots of making it. But the names that we mentioned at the beginning, they're the more likely ones that you're going to see in the mix. Rojas, Vargas, they're going to give Montgomery every opportunity they can to get in there and be part of the infield. Mydroth and Drury are probably the guys that are not on the 40-man and have the best chance of making it. If they decide that they don't want to drop anybody off the 40-man, the guys they're going to be looking at are guys like Baldwin that could show up. I don't think Ramos has a chance if you're going to bring Vargas in. And Jacob Amaya makes your starting roster. Things have gone poorly in spring training.
Oh, completely. Completely, because the only thing he offers is good defense at shortstop, and he offers zero else.
Yeah, I believe so. Now, let's look at catcher. Catcher is going to be crowded, but that's because you have some really good catching prospects. And this is what got my father to say, I don't know who these guys are. He was just not paying enough attention to know who Kyle Teal was. So,
as a White Sox fan, you should know who Kyle Teal was. He's the crown jewel in the Garrett Crochet trade.
I know. He didn't get it because he's been a little off. He's been like, this team's terrible. I don't want to pay any attention to him. So right now, Corey Lee would be the apparent starting catcher based upon the fact that he was last year.
He's the incumbent.
Matt Thies is listed as the guy who's likely going to get the backup role, who was signed in the offseason. Those two guys are on the 40-man roster. None of the other catchers that are going to be in the mix are on the 40-man roster. So you have to knock one of them off, and likely it's Thies. So Omar Narvaez, who used to be on the White Sox, who is now 33 years old, whose best years are behind him, signed as a free agent. He's going to be in the mix. Adam Hackenberg is a guy that's been in your system forever. He's going to come up from the minors and get an opportunity. He's only a double-A catcher. I don't expect anything from him. I don't expect him to make the team.
He's getting to be an old double-A player. He's almost 26.
Right. Now, the two guys that are not part of the 40-man, which, again, you're going to have to drop somebody off to add them. Kyle Teal is probably the better of the two big prospects, but probably isn't ready. But you're going to be watching him in spring training because this is a big-time acquisition for this team that may be a long-time catcher for you. And he's a very interesting guy. Courtney Finicum was on. She relayed that story that we've already heard, how he likes to take batting practice in the nude. He's a character. He sounds like he's an awful lot of fun. He can run. He can steal. He can hit. He can play defense. He's going to be a very interesting guy. And you can't wait for him to get there. The guy who probably could break through and make it on a 40-man who you're going to watch is Edgar Caro. Because Edgar Caro had some solid years he's now put together at the plate in the minors. He worked himself up to AAA, and he's carrying himself this offseason as a guy who expects to make the team, and he's getting interviewed a lot. Like, they're making sure he's out there and in front. This is a guy, I think he breaks camp with the team, or he at least has a great opportunity to break camp with the team, and it'll be him and Corey Lee, unless they don't think he's good enough to be a catcher. And if they don't think he's good enough to be a catcher, or they want to ease him in, but they want to use his bat, watch him be the DH, and a guy like Lenny Sosa doesn't get in there, right? Or one of these guys like Drury or Mydroth don't get in there because they want to add that bat. They want to have him DH. They want him stand at first every once in a while, maybe in a corner infield position, maybe catches once a week, and they carry 2 to 3 catchers in total. That's something that could happen as well.
Yeah, I think what they did with Kyle Schwarber on the north side of Chicago years and years ago, where he was a catcher whose bat was going to absolutely play in the majors, but his defense behind the plate was so subpar that you just didn't even want him back there. And there's a long history of catchers who make their way through the minors as a catcher. They're given every opportunity to stick back there, and then they're athletic enough to make the move to a new position because you want their bat in there. And also you want to protect the bat a little bit too. It's a special kind of athlete and a special kind of person in general that's able to take the abuse behind the plate and then maintain a good offensive profile. So with Caro, you're right. He's got a lot coming into this camp, but I honestly think the way it shakes out is going to be Corey Lee will still be given the opportunity to start. He's got great pop times behind the plate. They loved his defense. They loved the way he handled the staff. His bat is but okay. And I think Omar Narvaez outplays Matt Thies. Matt Thies is not good.
Yeah, I think
as a catcher, and I think Narvaez knocks Matt Thies off, and you sit there and you say this guy's a professional backup at this point, and his bat's going to be okay. And then I think Caro, I really do think if Caro breaks with the team, you're right. You might see him behind the plate once a week just to see how he does. But you're going to see him out there as a DH. You're going to see him out there rotating with Andrew Vaughn. They'll put Vaughn in as a DH then, or they'll see if Caro goes down to AAA. To start the season, I bet you he's playing a different position. I bet you he's playing third, or I bet you he's playing first, or I bet you he's playing in the outfield.
All right, so let's get to the outfield now, which is a lot of names you've already heard of, but I think we're going to get better performance out of Luis Robert Jr. in center field. They're going to get a better performance out of Andrew Benintendi in left field, even though he's terrible out there defensively. Mike Tauchman has been added. That's a professional baseball player that likely is your leadoff hitter and is a lefty in the order. He's 34 years old. He's been around baseball. He's slightly above a replacement level player who can go out there and play some defense and do enough in the leadoff position getting on base that it's going to be an improvement over what you had last year. And if used properly, I think you'll like him. He's not going to be like a world beater, but I think you're going to like him. And those guys are essentially your starters. It's pretty much unquestioned. Benintendi, Robert, and Tauchman are the 3 starting outfielders unless you play some sort of game where Benintendi is going to be DHing every once in a while because, again, not that good in the field. All right? I mean, there are times where you sit there and you go, I thought you were a professional outfielder, but clearly you're not. But otherwise, those are your guys. Now, the guy they acquired who stated that the White Sox targeted him as their number 1 acquisition is an outfielder by the name of Austin Slater. He's a right-handed hitter. He's 32 years old. He has bounced around baseball just a little bit in the last year. He played for 3 teams in 2024 and was terrible. But in all the other years before that,
when he was a Giant,
he came along fairly well as a San Francisco Giant. He had an above-average OPS for 4 straight years from 2020 through 2023. 20, 21, 22, and 23. He's above average in his OPS, so he was able to hit the ball. He's an interesting name. He's expected to make the team and come off the bench and be that 4th outfielder. And then when you look at the other outfielders that are floating out there that might have a chance of making the team, and Fangraphs has several guys not making it, they don't know for sure. These are all guesses. But I don't know if Dominic Fletcher is getting another chance. He's got to show up with a bat. We remember him from last year. Oscar Colas, they had the opportunity several times to dump him off the 40-man. Remember, Pedro Grifol didn't like him. There was something that was wrong there. They didn't want to give him a lot of opportunities last year. He's still on the 40-man roster and will have a chance to compete. He's an interesting story. It'll be interesting to see with a new manager, will he all of a sudden be somebody that they're talking about in the offseason, or is this his last chance?
Well, and they're going to play him at first as well now, apparently, too. So he's being given even more opportunity to try and make this team.
He's getting that opportunity because they're not sure about Vaughn. That's the thing. Andrew Vaughn is not assured of making it through this season as the first baseman. He's got to do something, all right? Corey Julks is back as a non-roster invitee. He was dropped off the 40-man roster. You remember him. He was acquired from the Astros. Kel Mitchell is a non-roster invitee who was a up-and-coming prospect with the Pirates for a few years. Couldn't really get it together with the bat, plays defense very well. Wilfred Veras, another outfielder that you're going to see out there as well. He's an NRI. And Braden Montgomery, he'll be the interesting non-roster invitee in the outfield because he's the big name who a couple years from now, I believe is your center fielder because they're going to move on from Robert the moment he starts hitting. They don't want to pay him that money. They've been trying to trade him this offseason. They're going to move on from Luis Robert at some point, whether you like it or not. That's what this team is now. They're going to be the Tampa Bay Rays. They are not giving somebody $20 million a year to stand in the outfield, at least not right now. So Braden Montgomery is going to show up. He's the big name. He's the long-term prospect that could be the best one out of the bunch in Garrett Crochet's return. He's going to show up as well, Ed.
Well, and Braden Montgomery, going backwards from those guys, Montgomery's a guy that's just getting his taste, right? You bring your top prospects, you bring your guys that you know have a future on the major league roster along when they're still young, so they get a taste of how big league camp works. So that's the only reason why he's showing up. He doesn't have a prayer of making this roster. It's way too early. Wilfred Veras at 22 is the prospect that is getting his shot to show up and see if he can prove that he is the next guy up from the minor leagues, because Cal Mitchell, like you said, faded prospect from another organization. Corey Julks, now an old faded prospect from another organization. And these are guys that might be able to hit their way on if everybody else fails. Dominic Fletcher and Oscar Colas have got to show up and prove that they belong. Fletcher in particular has got to prove that he's not the guy that they saw last year with the White Sox, but he's the guy that the Diamondbacks traded away, right? That he's the guy who was going to hit 300 and provide. I mean, he's an outstanding defender.
That's what you thought he was going to be. Like, he had shown glimpses of it. They obviously liked him. They thought he was going to hit and play good defense. And he just wasn't able to put it together. They gave up on a few guys. That's the one guy I'm glad they haven't dropped off the 40-man yet, because I think that there still might be something there, but it's an outside chance at this point.
It really is.
It was a terrible season last year. I don't know what young guy trying to break into the majors is going to do something amazing when he's surrounded by so much bad like it was last year. Sox in the Basement listeners trying to make the most of your money, give a call to Tom Walsh, your Edward Jones financial advisor. Located on the corner of 111th and Kedzie, but serving the Chicagoland area, Tom has a get-to-know-you approach and a do-the-right-thing attitude. He's been doing this for decades. It's all about knowing your options when you're investing and planning for your retirement. No matter what stage you are at, it costs nothing to check in with Tom. Give Tom Walsh, your Edward Jones financial advisor, a call today, 773-779-0023. Edward Jones, member SIPC. Let's move on now to the rotation, and Martin Perez is the big acquisition, which is not that great of an acquisition.
That's a pretty small, big acquisition.
Right. I mean, he's a professional starting pitcher who's going to eat some innings, but he's on a really good team. He's the fourth or fifth starter.
He's the settle it down guy on a young rotation.
Right. He's going to be the veteran guy that your new manager, Will Venable, knows from when he was at the Rangers, that's going to go out there and take the ball every 5 days and try to give you some sort of stability. He's also a left-handed arm, and they may break camp with only one lefty in the rotation. Jonathan Cannon, Davis Martin, Sean Burke, and Bryce Wilson, another acquisition, are projected by Fangraphs to be the starting five, although Bryce Wilson, I think, is a swing man. That's really what he is. And I would love to see one of these other younger pitchers force their way into the rotation and turn him into just that. And I think that if one of them does, that's exactly what he's earmarked to be. Drew Thorpe is supposedly going to be ready for the season, but I expect him to be a little bit behind because of his offseason surgery. I think he'll be there, but they're probably going to bring him along slowly. He could be the guy that takes that spot.
It wasn't major surgery, but it's enough to be cautious with him. Why rush the guy?
Right.
You know, you're not sitting here saying, okay, we got to get off to a hot start to catch those Guardians or catch those Twins. With Drew Thorpe, you're sitting there going, all right, get healthy, buddy, and let's see if you can go back to being what you were when you led the minor leagues in strikeouts before we traded for you. So I think Wilson, if Wilson starts the season in the rotation, he's that guy that, early on when you're missing games get rained out, snowed out, Wilson's the guy you skip into the rotation. Right. Exactly. Because he can come in out of the bullpen. He's used to it and he can still get his work in. And he will need to get his work in because, with young guys, even if Cannon and Burke, for example, make it all the way through, and make 30 starts for you, they're going to have some clunkers in there because they're still getting used to it.
Right. And then you have names like Ariarte, who I think he's going to be a pretty good pitcher. I just don't know if he's going to be a bullpen guy, but he may challenge for a rotation spot.
He's got that cartoon stuff that plays really well out of the bullpen in short bursts.
He does. Nick Nastrini, who I thought was going to be a pitcher and then kind of let me down last year, will get another opportunity. Jake Eater, the lefty acquired for Jake Berger, who has been nothing but hype from prospect heads, but I've yet to see something that tells me he's going to make it into the rotation. He'll show up. He's on the 40-man roster. Winkelman Gonzalez will be there. He was acquired in the Garrett Crochet trade. And then you're going to be looking at guys like Noah Schultz, who's going to be there as a non-roster invitee. He's not making the team. In fact, I just saw a recent interview in which it sounds like, at least from a player development side, their goal for him is just to get him used to pitching every fifth day because he didn't do that last year. So if he shows up,
they're taking the innings limits off of him.
Right. We've had people on the show in the offseason who have suggested that he was going to get here halfway through the year. That didn't feel like that. It doesn't feel like that now. Now it feels like he might be showing up in September at best. So I'm not counting on him. Hagen Smith could show up out of the bullpen. Brian Bannister likes to get these guys up to the majors. So I don't know what their plan is with him, but he's the big first-round draft choice from last year. He's going to be at camp. There's a lot of other names. Mason Adams is one of the more interesting names. I remember from last year, a lot of people talking about how well he was pitching down in the minors and that he could have gotten a call up to get a chance in the rotation. So that's one of the names I'm watching. He's not on the 40-man, but here's a guy who could make a splash in the spring and force the issue and get himself up there. So it's going to be interesting not only to see who fills out the rotation, but who's really in the long-term plans. Like they may start off saying, okay, we really don't have to bring up this guy who's not on the 40-man to start the year, but then by May, he's going to be up there. And it's also going to be interesting, what's going to be the philosophy with the young pitchers? Are you going to pull them when they have a bad first couple innings, or are you going to let them work through it and just give up the game? Because they only get so many innings, right? Like part of me is wondering whether or not they're going to sit there and say, okay, let's say Thorpe comes out there. Or one of these other young guys. Let's say Eater gets a start or something like that. Guy comes up here and he has a first inning looks pretty good. Second inning, he gives up like 4 runs. He's struggling. Do you take him out at that point and bring in the swingman? Isn't that the whole idea of the swingman? Isn't that the reason for Bryce Wilson? Like, then you bring that guy in rather than let the young pitcher die out there, or are you teaching him a lesson? So I'm going to be curious how they handle the young pitchers in 2025.
Yeah, because both of those philosophies have some level of merit and have been used in the past. The thing that catches me here is that with the pitchers, and this speaks really to the strength of what they have in the minors. If you look up and down, and we haven't gotten to the bullpen yet, if you look up and down, they're not inviting a whole lot of retread starters into camp. The only one that really stands out is Justin Dunn, who is a guy who pitched for Cincinnati, had some injury issues, and is now making his way back, and has had some run in the majors. But otherwise, it's the guys that are on the 40-man, and then prospects, like guys that you were looking at saying that these are actual prospects. Even if you don't believe in a Jake Eater, he is still a prospect at this level. And so it's an interesting thing where I felt like there was a chance that one of the things that could happen to this rotation was it was pieced together from guys who have some major league on the back of their baseball card, but not very good. And the only guy that really applies to, the two guys that really applies to are Martin Perez and Bryce Wilson, who, by the way, have both been relievers at points too. So they could both fill that swingman role, even though I think Perez is really Will Venable's security blanket out there.
One of the more interesting things going on the day the pitchers and catchers report is that one of your prospects, Kai Bush, is having Tommy John surgery. And so that's a brand new development. And he's having Tommy John surgery. So he's going to be out for a while. It's interesting in an off season. I really don't know what the story is yet because I just am reading this right now. In an off season that you wait until now to give the guy surgery. And so not a lot of urgency, we got to use him this year. But whatever happened to him, however it all went down, they're only deciding now to do a surgery that's going to take him out for well over a year instead of doing it at the beginning of the offseason. So whatever they thought,
he may not have been hurt at the beginning of the offseason. Remember, these guys do offseason throwing programs too, so it's possible.
You think that's where they came from? You see, that's what I'm trying to figure out as we're sitting here.
Well, and that's what'll be interesting, because I don't remember, and I'd have to go back and look at news stories about Kai Busch, but I don't remember off the top of my head him having issues at the end of the season. Of course, there were so many pitchers just being shuffled in and out at that point that it could have been lost there. But it's entirely possible. The other thing too is that if he was having the elbow problems at the end of the season, their doctors may have just said, look, this is something that we can treat conservatively and you should be fine for the start of the season. And if you don't respond, you don't respond. And that's it. So there's a couple of different reasons. I doubt it's a failure by the team to recognize that they needed to get this done.
Well, it is interesting because right now we're just going off a Merck tweet. I'm sure there'll be more information out by the time this show comes out on Wednesday. But as we're sitting here recording, we're just kind of going off a Scott Merkin tweet. And all the stories that have been written haven't really given any details about it. But he is a guy that will not be around for a little while. And as I look at the bullpen, I will say very simply, I don't care about them.
There's nothing to care about.
I just don't care. I'm sorry.
There's Gus Varland.
They're all probably wonderful guys, right? They're all probably just
Varland.
Great dudes.
We know about Gus Varland because of the social media account.
But I don't care because they're just relief pitchers on a team that's not expected to do anything, right? Make me care about you if you're a relief pitcher. Show me that I should care. Become good. Come out of the bullpen and be somebody that I'm not rolling my eyes going, well, we're going to give up 3 runs with this guy. Instead, come out of the bullpen and have one of my kids go, who's this guy? And I go, he's actually pretty good. I've seen him. Look at his stats up there. He keeps guys off base.
Yeah.
Be that guy. Make me care about you. That's my message to the bullpen, because I will say it again. I've said it so many times. Bullpens are just failed starters. And you can find arms if you're searching. And that's really what this is. Whatever group breaks camp, they were hot in the spring. That's basically how this is going to work with the bullpen. 9 out of 10 of them. Whoever comes out of the bullpen, how many number come out of there? They're going to be hot in the spring. That's why they're getting an opportunity. And if they start pitching poorly, somebody else will come up from the minors. That's what the White Sox bullpen is this year until they figure out who's a starter and who's a relief pitcher out of all the prospects they have down in the minor leagues. So, going through it right now, I think would be fruitless. I know that there'll be people who go, I just don't, to me, there's just a bunch of names on there. There's just a bunch of guys. They added Tyler Gilbert. I remember he was going to be a starter. Right now, he's projected to be a relief pitcher. He's another guy that could be a swing man. Remember, didn't he get an opportunity in Arizona? And he actually wasn't that bad, but he never really got a full opportunity in Arizona as a starter.
Right. Yeah. He was really good when he first came up with Arizona. The numbers game got to him. He never really got a fair shake. He got some run in Philadelphia, but there's really, as interesting a story as he is, or Cam Boozer, who is the guy that they got from the Red Sox, who had the really windy road to the major leagues as an old rookie last year.
Right.
And played for the Dogs, in independent ball. Gus Varland, who we had, the social media thing, because somebody tweeted, who the hell is Gus Varland? And they answered.
Prelander Baroa is an interesting name. You know what's interesting? The entirety of the Fangraphs list of who they're projecting, there's more lefties than righties. So that's not going to be what happens. This team is not going to bring 4 left-handed pitchers with them. So what they did is they went out and they collected guys that are at a major league level that can throw lefty. And there's really an open competition between those guys, because some of the prospects and some of the guys that are on the 40-man, or some of the guys that aren't projected to make the 40-man, who are right-handed relief pitchers, are actually going to move into that group, right? I mean, it goes to say that if you do find 5 starters, Bryce Wilson is going to be a right-handed reliever that's going to take one of those spots and move into the bullpen.
Right. Well, and they're projecting, Penn Murphy, who's a major league reliever, is right now off this list. Jordan Leisure is off the list. Brandon Eisert, who they just signed, is off the list. James Karinchak, you might remember from the Guardians, was once upon a time one of their top setup guys and is coming back from injury. He's off the list as a non-roster invitee. You're not going to carry this many lefties that Fangraphs is projecting. But the question is are you going to have a closer emerge? And that's where a guy like Baroa is interesting. Or you have a Rule 5 guy in Shane Smith that you're going to have to sit there and hope that he pitches well enough to earn being on the major league roster for the entire year, because, that's what happens with Rule 5. Otherwise, they got to offer him back. So is he a guy that's going to at least be serviceable? I mean, there's some stories here if you really want to dig for him.
We've already spent too much time on relief pitchers. Those are your White Sox. Pitchers and catchers have reported. Baseball is back. Are you excited?
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found and always on soxinthebasement.com.